There's an area of plastic trash the size of France in the North Pacific Ocean. An application has been made to the United Nations for it to become a country. And that's exciting, because ever since I heard Katy Perry's lyric, "Did you ever feel like a plastic bag drifting through the wind, wanting to start again?" I've longed to float away, and now I can. So I'm going to the plastic pelago to become a citizen of this country with a half-life of forever. Nothing can ravage the plastic pelago. Plastic is immune to disease, to ants, to fashion. I'm going with a pile of debris, which is the official currency. I'll build me a Tupperware castle, storm-proof and airtight. I'll have plastic bed sheets and bath curtains. I'll wear plastic shirts and soft plastic for underwear. I'll wear plastic shoes and watch plastic memories. I'll even eat fish that have pieces of plastic in them. Because I am a contributing citizen to the plastic pelago, I'll never use the same piece of plastic twice. To help build my plastic account, every piece of plastic I float into the ocean is postmarked for the North Pacific. Anyhow, more than 8 million tons of plastic goes into the ocean every year. So there'll be more plastic than fish by 2050. Hooray! Nature helps out too, of course. Dead whales wash up on acrylic beaches, stomachs full of plastic bags, seagulls crash onto fields of mineral water bottles tangled up in cable ties. Some days I imagine the oceans are sheets of corrugated plastic gently undulating, having achieved ultimate convergence through the act of some welding god, and all the fish are banging their heads underneath, gasping for air, then slowly succumbing to the taste of plastic, breaking through the surface like a new religion, an ecstasy that keeps them coming back for more. So nothing biodegradable, please. I am building a plastic colony of single-use unrecyclables. All those sustainable paper tigers won't get to me. Their roars pulp to silence, but hills and valleys of polypropylene furniture fill the plasticated citizens. The plastic pelago is growing. All this debris is indestructible. And thank God my vinyl collection is made entirely of PVC, which is, you guessed it, plastic. So I've packed my plastic bags and raised my plastic cup to toast this country of discovered things. It feels like the days of Alexander the Great, except we are double bagging continents and trapping icebergs in moisture-waking lycra. Will we ever stop? Maybe we won't. Maybe one day we'll wake up and the sky is cling wrap, the clouds are polyester, and a giant black albatross is coming for us all. Its plastic beak shining in the sun.
Welcome, Marc, to Vishwarang Singapore poetry segment for youth. It's spoken word or slam poetry. Marc Nair is a leading poet of Singapore. He has written 12 books and worked in many literature festivals in Singapore. He has worked in confluence of arts, which makes his work very interesting for all of us, because Vishwarang is all about confluence of different art forms. So very warm welcome from all our listeners. I think you have more youth listeners to whatever you write, and people really love your poetry. So warm welcome to Vishwarang.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for making time for us. Let's start by trying to understand your poetic journey. Why do you write? Do you feel some compulsion, or what's your writing process?
That's like 3 questions in one. Why do I write? What's my compulsion and what's my writing process? So very briefly, I would say that I write because I have an itch to scratch, and poetry is my way of scratching that itch. Whether it's reading about something ridiculous on the news, or responding to a social injustice in Singapore, or just trying to see the funny side of life, in terms of perhaps everyday life, when I walk around, or take transport and see things, and then I respond to it. So poetry is my palette, in which I discover the world.
Wow. So I think that when you speak about it, a little bit of photographer or a artist come out when you say poetry is your palette, and you are as good a photographer also. So tell me, I remember meeting you nearly 12 to 13 years ago in slam poetry sessions in Blue Jazz Cafe. So why did you start with slam and spoken word? Is it a form of activism, or trying to be away from the cliches and write what you really want rather than what people expect of you?
I started in spoken word and poetry slam because I think it was, well, chance. It was almost an accident that I came across as a poetry slam event, and when I was in university, and I didn't really have any poems that were written for slam, but I had a couple of poems that I thought were quite funny and slightly humorous, and I thought maybe they would work. But gradually I learned that spoken word has its own style of writing, has its own kind of development of narrative voice, and the way the poet is the performer in some ways, and how images are used. And also, of course, at Poetry Slam, you have like a 3-minute time limit. So you're writing within that time frame. I think in terms of content, you can't escape cliches wherever you write. I mean, cliches are unfortunately part of the vocabulary of too many poets who don't do the hard work of writing and searching for original imagery. So people always, return back to very basic things that they know. But the content generally of spoken word in the US actually is, there's a lot of and you can easily see this on YouTube if you look at spoken word videos,
Yeah.
that they focus on social issues, they focus on race, they focus on responding to politics. It's not so much the case in Singapore. I think Singapore doesn't have Singapore has a wide variety of voices. You have the poets who deal with uh, feminism. You have the poets who deal with race. You have some poets who talk about politics. You have poets who write about love in everyday situations. I'm probably someone who does write about everyday situations, but I also enjoy finding the ridiculous and using uh, comedic effects such as parody or satire to work with.
I think humor is a very, very powerful but very difficult tool to use in poetry. So how much do you think the rhyming and expression and the voice performance is a part of spoken word form of poetry? And since you write books also and you do spoken word, so how much is rhyming part of your narrative, your scheme?
Well, actually, this is very interesting because rhyme is something that it's not often used, like a formal rhyme scheme is not something that you would see in, let's say, spoken word from the UK and the US. They would use rhyme as an internal form of structure to create a sense of rhythm and perhaps pace a narrative or to reinforce an image. And I think that's largely the case in my own writing. I don't write within a formal rhyme structure unless I am doing that deliberately. So, for example, I'm writing a sonnet, but that would be more for something I would publish. But what I've noticed is that a lot of Indian poets who come to slam tend to use rhyme in a very formalistic fashion. So I can only imagine that their education of poetry involved a lot of rhyme.
Yes, and because I think the music, Sangeet and Geet actually. Songs are a big part of
Mm,
our
mm.
culture, and I would say the what we have imbibed through our childhood. So we do, I would say, as a Geetkar, I do tend to rhyme a lot, and it becomes easier. But then I think in slam poetry, you can't be just doing a poem that needs a lot of, you know, introspection. You have to do write something which appeals to the listener then and there. You can't do a slam poetry which needs lot of understanding, and people need to listen to it 3 4 times to really get the gist of it, and that could be the difference between what we write and what we narrate on a stage.
Yes, of course, the audience only has one chance, right? And they don't have the text to read. So you have to find a way, and it's often not just in the use of rhyme, but it's the cadence, the tone, the pace, the volume. These are all factors that come into play when presenting a spoken word piece.
Yeah, I also really caught on to the word imagery because as a poet, it means a lot to me, creating new imagery, and that actually needs. How do you create new imagery in Singapore, for example? The life is so well structured here. How do you create? I would say non-mundane or very innovative things from mundane.
Oh, I am trying to think of something off the top of my head. Uh, eh, so later we're going to talk about one of my books, Sidelines, and I have a poem in there that is responding to an image by my collaborator in the book, a photographer, and she took a photograph of a playground in Singapore that has it's called the Dragon Playground. So it's one of these old playgrounds built in the 70s, and it's built in the shape of a dragon. And when she took the photograph, it was from across a field behind a tree. And so when I responded to the image, I imagined that the dragon was alive and it was moving across, like out of the trees towards the highway, and that act of personification gave the dragon a new gave me a new way of looking at the dragon.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think dragon is a big part of Chinese psyche that we are all embedded into in Singapore. Okay, tell me about your own life with poetry. Is poetry your main profession? Do you envisage somewhere in future somebody having livelihood out of poetry in Singapore?
As far as I know, I don't think anybody is a full-time poet in Singapore. Uh, I might be wrong, but I don't think so because we just don't have the market to sell the requisite number of books. In fact, probably poets make more money from doing school workshops or talks or things like that. But still, I think most people have day jobs because poetry is is a very tiny segment of the market, and local poetry even more so.
With Vishwarang and with this connection between India and Singapore, we really hope that we bring Singapore poetry to a much bigger audience. And I read about your 12 books, and I have read some of it also. And all the titles of your book is so interesting. And tell us about your latest book, which was launched in 2019, The Sightlines, which is a confluence of two arts, isn't it? So tell us about.
Yes.
And we
So this is the thing.
yeah, narrative
Now
poem.
this Okay. So anyway, Sidelines
Mm.
is a collaboration with Tay Sen Wei, who's a film photographer. So she shot 36 images for on film, and I responded to them with 36 poems, and 36 is a number of exposures in a roll of film.
Yeah.
And it is images that's the book begins and ends in Singapore, but then it goes all throughout the world. And it's called Sidelines because we wanted to develop multiple ways of seeing, of looking at a subject. So the poems don't have a fixed form. Some are shaped poems, concrete poetry. Some are haiku. Some have rhyme. Some are written, just in free verse. And I wanted the images to lead to kind of inform the way I would approach the poem. So
I'm going to read one poem. It's called Anatomy of Lives Foretold. And this is a poem that was taken in a Muay Thai studio in Siem Reap, Cambodia. But what's interesting about the image is that it's actually a series of portraits, a couple of portraits of a couple. When they were younger, and then after that when they were older.
Wow.
And on the wall behind them is like pictures of a glamour uh, model in like pulled out from a magazine and pasted on the wall. So I imagine that maybe the woman in the portraits was that model. And so this is a haiku series of 5 haikus that kind of respond and describe the images. So, Anatomy of Lives Foretold. When they first dated, she never wore makeup. How happy they were. Then the glamour, then the beauty shop, lovers like last year's fashion. Magazines carried her eyes looking all directions but his own. This was just business. This was a game. Then she fell in love. Years after, they sit, eyes straight, looking through the lens to the end.